more than 40 innocent lives have been lost and many communities have been totally destroyed. The president has been actively monitoring the situation, and the Trump administration is engaged with governors and local officials to restore affected communities and livelihoods. Everyone impacted is in our prayers, and President Trump is fully prepared to assist state and local officials as they recover from the horrific damage. The president has had a very busy weekend, making our country and the world a much safer place. President Trump ordered decisive military action against the Houthi terrorists in Yemen. These Houthi terrorists have engaged in piracy, violence, and terrorism against American ships for years under the Biden administration, costing billions of dollars and putting innocent lives at risk. Joe Biden's pathetic weakness invited these unacceptable attacks. But there's a new sheriff in town, and his name is Donald Trump. And the world is officially on notice. America has a commander-in-chief whose peace-through-strength approach is unwavering and should not be tested. As the president said, no terrorist force will stop American commercial and naval vessels from freely sailing throughout the world. Houthi terrorists and their Iranian backers should not cross President Trump again, and the president has made that clear today. On another important matter, President Trump signed a proclamation invoking the Alien Enemies Act regarding the invasion of the United States by the foreign terrorist organization Tren de Aragua. At the president's direction, the Department of Homeland Security carried out a counter-terrorism operation deporting nearly 200 violent Tren de Aragua terrorists, which will save countless American lives. Thanks to the great work of the Department of State, these heinous monsters were extracted and removed to El Salvador, where they will no longer be able to pose any threats to the American public. Tren de Aragua is one of the most ruthless terrorist gangs in the world, and they are responsible for some of the most heinous crimes that have occurred in our nation's history in recent years, including the savage murders of beautiful Laken Riley and Jocelyn Nungray. President Trump promised Laken and Jocelyn's families during his campaign that he would demand justice for their beautiful girls, and that's exactly what he did. As the president acknowledged during his inaugural address on January 20th, he pledged to invoke this act, and he has no higher responsibility than to defend our country from threats and invasions. President Trump will continue his historic efforts to seal the border and prevent these illegal invaders from coming here in the first place. As the New York Times is acknowledged over the weekend, President Trump's policies are working. Here's how the Times summed it up. Illegal crossings at the U.S.-Mexico border are down to their lowest level in decades. Once crowded migrant shelters are empty. Instead of heading north, people stranded in Mexico are starting to return home in bigger numbers. The border is almost unrecognizable from just a couple of years ago, when hundreds of thousands of people from around the world were crossing into the United States every month in scenes of chaos and upheaval. This is the Trump effect in action. And again, those are the words from the New York Times. We didn't need a border security bill. We just needed President Trump. All of these actions taken together are contributing to a wave of optimism about the direction of our great country. According to brand new polling from NBC News, more registered voters say the United States is heading in the right direction than at any point since early 2004. Americans support President Trump's common sense approach that's getting our country back on track in record time. Meanwhile, the president's critics can't say the same. That same new NBC poll also found that the Democrat Party has reached an all-time low in popularity. It turns out when you let your hatred of President Trump get in the way of doing what is best for America, the people reject you. Who would have thought? Joining us today in our new media seat is Kelly Meyer. She is a White House correspondent with News Nation. News Nation started in 2021 and is one of America's fastest growing cable news networks with a focus on news for all of America. It's part of a larger ecosystem, Nexstar, which is home to News Nation, the political website The Hill, the broadcast network The CW, and local Nexstar stations. With that, kick us off, please, Kelly.
Thank you, Caroline. What do you say to Americans who want safe streets but are concerned due process is being violated?
The president is using every lever of his executive authority and his constitutional authority within the bounds of the immigration laws of our country to ensure that our streets are safer for law-abiding American citizens. And this administration is focused on detaining, arresting, and deporting illegal criminal aliens. And as you saw this past weekend, the president used his authority under the Alien Enemies Act to deport foreign terrorists. Tren de Aragua is now a designated foreign terrorist organization. And as I said, there were nearly 200 Tren de Aragua members who were sent to El Salvador this weekend. Countless lives will be saved because of this action. And if you talk to the families, the Angel families, as I mentioned, Laken Riley and Jocelyn Nungray, they understand the grave cost of life at the hands of these illegal terrorists. And the president is proud to deliver on that promise for them.
And just to follow up on that, this will be challenged later today in the courts. Does the president, does this allow him to defy the court order without having this the checks and balances and the separation of power?
No. In fact, this administration acted within the confines of the law, again, within the president's constitutional authority and under the authority granted to him under the Alien Enemies Act. We are quite confident in that, and we are wholly confident that we are going to win this case in court. Peter.
Thank you, Caroline. If you guys can't send 200 Tren de Aragua terrorists at a time to El Salvador, where are you going to send them instead?
It's a very good question. You'd have to ask the courts and the people on the left who are trying to fight this administration for doing the business that this president sought out to do, which is to deport these foreign terrorists. And we're very grateful to President Bukele and to El Salvador for accepting these heinous monsters where they will face justice.
And if these guys are terrorists at war with the United States, is President Trump considering anything more lethal to address them than just sticking them on a plane somewhere else?
Well, it sounded like you had a little bit of curiosity in the premise of your question, so I want to address it. These are designated foreign terrorists. The president signed a proclamation on February 20th, 2025, designating TDA as a foreign terrorist organization that was in consultation with the Attorney General and the Secretary of Treasury. That was pursuant to 8 U.S. Code 1189. The president has the right to do that, and I think nobody would argue that Tren de Aragua should be designated a foreign terrorist organization. If you want to have that argument, I'm happy to do it. These are heinous monsters, rapists, murderers, kidnappers, sexual assaulters, predators who have no right to be in this country, and they must be held accountable.
And something different. There is now a member of the European Parliament from France who does not think the U.S. represents the values of the Statue of Liberty anymore. They want the Statue of Liberty back. So is President Trump going to send the Statue of Liberty back to France?
Absolutely not. And my advice to that unnamed low-level French politician would be to remind them that it's only because of the United States of America that the French are not speaking German right now. So they should be very grateful to our great country. Kelly.
Is the administration prepared to give the court what it wants in terms of the time of the flights that departed, that went to El Salvador, and some of those details that the judge is asking for in trying to determine the timing? Clearly, the 5 named individuals were not deported
That's
in
right.
compliance, but looking more broadly, wanting to know about the timing of flights and so forth, because the verbal order did say turn around the flights if there's an issue. So is the administration prepared to provide that information?
I'm prepared to provide it right now. All of the planes that were subject to the written order, the judge's written order, took off before the order was entered in the courtroom on Saturday. And the administration will, of course, be happily answering all of those questions that the judge poses in court later today.
And for people who have due process questions about making certain that there wasn't anyone who was swept up who did not meet the criteria that you laid out, is there a way for the administration to provide more detail about how that was determined, who the individuals were that met this deportation order?
Yes, I can assure the American people that Customs and Border Patrol and ICE and the Department of Homeland Security are sure about the identities of the individuals who were on these planes and the threat that they pose to our homeland. They take this incredibly seriously. They are putting their lives on the line to deport these designated terrorists from our country, and they should be trusted to do that. And that's exactly what the American people elected this president to do.
Thanks, Caroline. Just to follow up on that, then, so you're saying definitively if the administration can prove everyone that was put on those flights to El Salvador was either a member of Tren de Agua, MS-13, or some other
Yeah,
entity.
we've already provided the breakdown in the effort of transparency about the 261 illegal aliens who were deported. 137 of those were deported under the Alien Enemies Act. 101 of those were Venezuelans removed via Title VIII, which, as you know, are just regular immigration proceedings. And 23 of them were MS-13 Salvadorian gang members. There were also 2 MS-13 ringleaders as part of that group of 23 who President Bukele particularly expressed his gratitude for their return so he can demand justice in his home country. Jennifer.
What criteria, though, other than, say, tattoos or maybe being in the wrong place at the wrong time, are they using to determine that someone is actually a member of one of these organizations?
Intelligence and the men and women on the ground in the interior of our country who are finally being allowed to do their jobs. Their hands were tied under the previous administration, and as I said, they take their jobs very seriously. They should be trusted and respected by the American public with this operation, and of course, as I said to Kelly, the administration will provide all details to the questions that the court poses. Jennifer.
One more follow-up on that. Can you say how much the U.S. is paying El Salvador to imprison these Venezuelans? And then a different question on Russia. I was wondering if you could give us an update on the ceasefire negotiations, and is there anything you can share on the list that Putin passed along to President Trump for the things he's requesting?
Sure. To your first question, it was approximately $6 million to El Salvador for the detention of these foreign terrorists. And I would point out that is pennies on the dollar in comparison to the cost of life and the cost it would impose on the American taxpayer to house these terrorists in maximum security prisons here in the United States of America. And I would echo the message of our Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, who expressed his gratitude to President Bukele and El Salvador's government for their cooperation in this deal. As for Russia, as you know, the president announced last night on Air Force One on his return from his very busy weekend in Florida that he will be speaking to President Putin tomorrow. I won't get ahead of those negotiations, but I can say we are on the 10th yard line of peace, and we've never been closer to a peace deal than we are in this moment. And the president, as you know, is determined to get one done.
Sharon?
Sure, Caitlin.
I have 2 questions for you, one on the flights, but first on the president's post overnight saying that he is the pardons that were issued by President Biden preemptively to members of the January 6th committee, that they're now null and void. Have attorneys here at the White House told President Trump that he has the legal authority to undo a pardon simply because it was signed by Otto Penn, as he said?
The president was begging the question that I think a lot of journalists in this room should be asking about whether or not the former president of the United States, who I think we can all finally agree was cognitively impaired. I know it took people some time to finally admit that, but we all know that to be true, as evidenced by his disastrous debate performance against President Trump during the campaign. I digress on that. But the president was raising the point that did the president even know about these pardons? Was his illegal signature used without his consent or knowledge? And that's not just the president or me raising those questions, Caitlin. According to the New York Post, there are Biden officials from the previous White House who raised those questions and wondered if the president was even consulted about his legally binding signature being signed onto documents. And so I think it's a question that everybody in this room should be looking into, because certainly that would propose perhaps criminal or illegal behavior if staff members were signing the President of the United States autograph without his consent.
Biden is on the record talking about issuing preemptive pardons to these people.
But was he aware of his signature being used on every single pardon? That's a question you should ask the Biden White House.
Is there any evidence on that he wasn't aware of it?
You're a reporter. You should find out.
Okay,
Sean.
on the flights, so I have a question on the timeline of the flights. You keep talking about the judge's written order, which hit the docket Saturday night at about 7:26 p.m., but he issued a verbal order before that at about 6:45 and 6:48 p.m. based on the court hearing. A verbal order from the bench. Does the White House feel the need to comply with a verbal order from this judge?
Again, as I said, all of the planes subject to the written order of this judge departed U.S. soil, U.S. territory before the judge's written order.
But what about the verbal order? which of course carries the same legal weight as a written order, and said for the planes to turn around if they were
Well,
in the air.
there's actually questions about whether a verbal order carries the same weight as a legal order, as a written order, and our lawyers are determined to ask and answer those questions in court. Sean.
Hey, so on Friday, the president suggested at length that it should be illegal to criticize judges, but he has repeatedly criticized judges who rule against him, and Elon Musk is calling for impeachment of judges who have opposed the administration. So how are those two things not in conflict?
I have not heard the president talk about impeaching judges. I know you mentioned Mr. Musk's tweet, but I have not heard the president of the United States ask that. Mary.
Hey, thanks, Caroline. I wanted to ask about this video I saw this morning set to the tune of, I believe, Closing Time, about deportations of illegal migrants. What's the strategy behind the White House's videos they've been putting out on this, and can you kind of talk us through the thinking on these videos?
Sure. I think the White House and our entire government clearly is leaning into the message of this president. And we are unafraid to double down and to take responsibility and ownership of the serious decisions that are being made. The president was elected with an overwhelming mandate to launch the largest mass deportation campaign in American history, and that's exactly what he is doing. And to this very day, we are now, I think, 56 or 7 days into the administration by my count. The president still receives an overwhelming public support for the policies that he is enacting. So we are unafraid to message effectively what the president is doing on a daily basis to make our communities safer. And the specific video you referenced, I think it sums up our immigration policy pretty well. You don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. Go ahead.
Thanks, Caroline. I have two questions. First, will President Trump put sanctions on Russia if the talks on Tuesday don't go as hoped? And secondly, have any illegal immigrants self-deported through CBP Home yet?
To your first question, it's something the president has floated, and certainly he's willing to do if necessary. I don't have anything to read out, and I would never get ahead of the president on such a serious decision. To your second question about the CBP Home app, I would have to check in with the Department of Homeland Security, but it's a great question, and we're very proud to repurpose this app, which the Biden administration abused to facilitate the mass illegal entry of illegal immigrants into our country. It was like a fast pass at Disneyland. That's not happening under this administration. We are encouraging illegal immigrants to actively self-deport to maybe save themselves from being in one of these fun videos.
Caroline.
Sure. John, good to
Thank
see you.
After President Trump strafe-bombed the Houthis yesterday, he said that if they retaliate, he was going to personally hold Iran accountable for that. Holding them accountable, what would that look like?
Well, I would defer you to what the president put out this morning, John, where he said very clearly, I will read it, "Let nobody be fooled. The hundreds of attacks being made by Houthi, the sinister mobsters and thugs based in Yemen, who are hated by the Yemeni people, are all created by Iran. Any further attack or retaliation by the Houthis will be met with great force, and there is no guarantee that the force will stop there. Iran has played the innocent victim of rogue terrorists from which they've lost control, but they haven't lost control. They are dictating every move, giving them the weapons, supplying them with money and highly sophisticated military equipment, and even so-called intelligence. Every shot fired by the Houthis will be looked upon from this point forward as being a shot fired from the weapons and leadership of Iran. And Iran will be held responsible and suffer the consequences, and those consequences will be dire." That is a statement from the President of the United States just moments ago. I have nothing additional to share, but our message to Iran is you better take this president seriously, and I think the Houthis learned that the hard way this past weekend. As I said in my opening remarks, there's a new sheriff in town, and this president is not just going to sit on his hands and allow terrorists to launch attacks on commercial vessels and U.S. naval ships. Those actions will not be tolerated. Sure, Edward.
Yeah, thanks. Caroline, on the economy. So after mostly a down week last week in the economy, you've been very vocal as well as other cabinet members about how we're in a transition and about how this economic transition, and there's a plan, a long-term plan for tariffs on this. How concerned is the president that the markets and Americans, for lack of a better term, will freak out over these tariffs and be concerned about a long-term plan?
Sure. I think I've been asked this question and answered this question respectfully, Edward. We are in a period of transition. The president has made that clear. He also has made his belief in tariffs and what they will do for our great country clear, restoring wealth back to our country. And if you look at the president's first-term economic formula, massive deregulation, tax cuts, lowering the cost of living with an energy boom, which the American people can expect soon. Wall Street and Main Street should both be assured by what President Trump did in his first term. It's the exact same formula. In fact, I would argue it's even better this time around. And if you look at some of the economic indicators in the last week, the latest CPI report last week beat expectations.